Hi, I'm Marco and I'm the founder of Xcrafts. Thank you so much for downloading the 10-year anniversary edition of our free e-jets for X-Plane 12. To mark a decade of Xcrafts, we wanted to give the community something truly special. So we took our older e-jets, we improved them, updated them, and we fully optimized them for X-Plane 12. Now keep in mind that these free e-jets are still very far from the real thing. They rely mostly on default X-Plane systems. So if you are just starting in flight simulation, this will be a great start. But if you really want to try what it's like to fly a real e-jet with an Authentic FMS, VNAV, many automated systems and autopilot modes, a fully fine-tuned flight model and incredibly detailed 3D modeling, you should explore our flagship product, the ERJ Family. Now, as with any Xcrafts products, I wanted to make it easier for you to start flying these planes. So I created this demo flight where I will show you how to fly a full flight from start to finish in just under an hour. So let's get right into it. Alright, before our flight I have a few disclaimers. So first of all, the free e-jets and our paid e-jets are completely different products. The free versions are not representative of our payware products and of the quality of our work. They use our old models and very few custom systems. We pretty much took our old e-jets for X-Plane 11, we improved them, we updated them, however they're still very far from the real thing, so keep that in mind. The second, we are providing these free e-jets in their final state. That means that we are aware that there will be bugs, there might be things that are incorrect, however we cannot guarantee any future updates. And the last thing is, we at Xcrafts want to provide the best customer support we can. However, we can only do that for our payware products. Therefore, if you have any issues with the free e-jets, we suggest that you go on our website where you will find the frequently asked questions, you will find the getting started resources with tutorials, and you'll find lots of other useful links. Alright, so let's start our demo flight. So to make it easy for you to transition from our free e-jets to our paid e-jets, I decided to use the exact same demo flight. So we will be flying from Bergamo in Italy to the capital of Austria, Vienna. And throughout the video, I will also point out all the things that are wrong or missing in the free e-jets so that you know that we are aware of them and that you can find them in the paid e-jets. And also, I want to mention that this flight plan was generated with nav data from March 2024. So if in the future you cannot exactly enter the same route in the FMS, you should just use the updated procedures. Alright, so in this demo flight, I will show you how you can complete a full flight from start to finish. We are starting with engines already running. If you want to learn how to power up the airplane or how to start the engines, we have a separate video for that. In this video, you will learn how to enter the whole flight plan using the default X-Plane FMS. We will enter a SID, an airway, a waypoint, a star, and the approach. You will learn how to edit the flight plan. You will learn how to do a direct to, and I will show you how to descend, how to manage your speeds, and how to do an ILS approach. On the E175, you can also change the winglets from the normal ones to the enhanced ones. So to do that, you have to go all the way to the top of the screen, click plugins, E175 options configurations, and you can select between the default winglets or the enhanced winglets. So today we will use the enhanced winglets. Alright, now let's go into the cockpit. Firstly, I will increase the brightness of the screens. These knobs control the brightness and the lighting of the panels in the cockpit. These knobs are not configured the way they would be on the real planes. They are simplified, however, our paid e-jets have them set up correctly, and you would be able to control all the brightness of the screens and all the cockpit lights individually. Next, you can pop all of these screens up. All of them are representative of what is on the real e-jets, however, they are missing many features and they're not very high resolution as they would be on the paid e-jets. Also, the MFD would have a whole section here with the VSD, which is the vertical situation profile, which you can see here. However, this is just a static version of it to show you what it would look like. And you can go through all the synoptic pages. So this one shows you the control surfaces and deflections, the hydraulics, fuel, electrical system, This is the air conditioning system and anti-ice. If we go to the map, we can clean it up a little bit by going to the options and hiding some of the elements. This is also not how it would be on the real E-jets. This dropdown would be coming from the map or plan sections. And then we have the iCast screen that shows you the engine indications, the flaps, the trim, etc. So let's go ahead and enter the flight plan. So we are going to click on the left MCDU. Now this is the default FMS in X-Plane 12. If you want to experience the real FMS as the one on the real E-jets, you can explore our paid versions. The autopilot on the E-jets in real life is really tightly connected with the FMS. From VNAV to FMS speeds or ILS auto-tune, those features are only available in our paid E-jets. By the way, I'm recording this in March 2024, when the version 1.1.0 of our paid E-jets was not released yet. However, that version will bring the FMS speeds and ILS auto-tune. And we are expecting to release this in a few months, so you can look forward to all those extra features. Now, this default FMS will allow you to enter the flight plan. You will be able to enter the SID, so the departure, the route, the arrival, and the approach. However, VNAV is only available in the paid version. So let's go ahead and enter the flight plan. So we're gonna click on the flight plan page. And by the way, I'm going to breeze through this. There are many tutorials online that you can use to learn how to use the default FMS, including the manual, which you can find if you Google X-Plane FMS manual. All right, so we'll be flying from Bergamo to Vienna. Next, we will select the departure, which will be runway 28. The SID will be, we need to go to the next page, so Legal 1V. And the transition is this one right here. All right. So next, we will go ahead and enter the route. So starting with an airway, which will be Mike 985. So you would be entering airways on the left side and the waypoints on the right side. So if you want to just enter a waypoint, you would do it here. If you want to enter an airway, which is a sequence of many different waypoints in a line, you can enter it on the left. Okay, and this is telling us airway waypoint mismatch. That is because in order to enter an airway here, it needs to connect to the previous waypoint. So the previous waypoint needs to be on that airway. However, this default FMS, for some reason, it added some arbitrary location here. I'm not sure why it added it. However, we can simply delete it. You can do that by pressing delete on the FMS and then pressing the right button next to the waypoint that you want to delete. And now we can go ahead and enter the airway. Right there. Perfect. And now we need to enter the exit waypoint of the airway, which will be Malug. Perfect. Next, we will be entering a waypoint which is not an IFR waypoint, meaning it wouldn't be used for a real-world flight plan. However, we are only loading it so that I can demonstrate how to select a waypoint with multiple occurrences of the same ID, and we'll also use it to demonstrate how to delete a waypoint later on. So the waypoint designation is Victor Papa 011, and we can enter it here. And now it will give you the list of all the waypoints with the same ID that it found all around the world. The list is usually listed probably from the distance from the airplane. On the Authentic FMS, it would be listed with distance from the preceding waypoint, so it would pretty much always be the first waypoint. However, here, this is not the waypoint, so it will be on the second page right here, because I checked the location on the Navigraph charts. Perfect. Now there won't be any more route points right now, so we can go ahead and enter the arrival. So we'll press on the departure arrival button, arrival. We will be using the APTA 2W star with the ILS 34 and the Balfour and transition of the approach. Okay, now we've entered the whole flight plan and we can go ahead and execute it. That now turned the route magenta. And if you want to check that you've entered it correctly, just press the legs page. Now go into the plan mode. And now you can use the step button to step through the whole flight plan. This will allow you to see if it connects correctly. And okay, now we can see that after the Victor Papa 011 waypoint, the route disappears and it continues after the start of the star. That is because the FMS has added a discontinuity right there. A discontinuity is when the FMS doesn't know how to connect the route section of the flight plan with the arrival, because they don't end and start with the same waypoint. So all you need to do is simply delete the discontinuity by stitching the flight plan together. So you just need to select the waypoint, the first waypoint of the star, and insert it where the discontinuity is, which will connect the flight plan. We can see this is the last waypoint of the route, and this is the first star of the star, and they are connected now. So if you execute it, you can see it's all connected. You should always go and check your route before you take off to really make sure that you have loaded the route that you want to fly. Okay, next we're gonna go to the climb page, which is where you would enter the speeds for the climb, which will be used by FMS speed that automatically changes the speed for the auto throttle. However, the free E-jets don't have FMS speed. We only have that available on the paid E-jets starting with version 1.1.0. Next, we can go to the cruise page, which is where we're going to enter the cruise altitude. This is important so that the FMS can calculate where the top of descent will be. Next, we have the descent page, where you would select the descent path angle. On the map, you can also see the indication for the top of descent, which is where we will start our descent to Vienna. Now on the paid E-jets, we would be able to use the Authentic FMS with the EFB, which we would use to calculate the weight and balance. We would calculate the takeoff CG, the zero fuel weight. We would enter the performance for takeoff, and the EFB would calculate the V speeds for us, which we could then load into the FMS and into the autopilot. We could enter all the performance pages in the FMS, like the zero fuel weight, the cruise altitude, the takeoff CG. The FMS would then use that to calculate the correct vertical profile, and it will also respect all the altitude restrictions. So the big difference is that it would be much easier because we can just use the EFB with the FMS. We would enter a few known things into the FMS. It would calculate all the necessary data for us, which we would then enter or load in the FMS, and we would have the airplane set up correctly. So we can go back to the map mode. Here we have a few options. Weight and balance. We can open the load planner. This is a tool that helps you calculate different load setups. However, this is not a tool that will enter these weights into the plane, actually. It will not apply it in X-plane. This is just helping you, like a calculator, what all the options are that you can load in the plane. And it will tell you if you're still within the right limits for the takeoff CG. So we're going to use the weight and balance X-plane configuration menu. I know that we need 8,000 pounds of fuel and our payload will be 18,800 pounds. Now, if you don't know what values you should use for your weight and balance or for the performance, or if you don't know where to fly in general, you can subscribe to our weekly real-world flight plans, which is a free service that we started to make it really easy and quick to get all the information you need. So instead of deciding where to fly and how much fuel you will need, we do all the hard work for you so that all you have to do is open one email, load the EJets or any other plane and go straight to flying. Alright, and now let's make sure that we enter the speeds and the altitude. So the speed should be, we can do 210 for the takeoff. If we were using the FMS speed and the paid EJets, the FMS would set the speed automatically based on the V speeds that was calculating with the EFB. And it would automatically increase the speed based on the retraction of your flaps and other limits. We can set flaps too right now, which we can see right here. Next, we can set the altitude to 33,000, the cruise altitude. Perfect. We can engage the flight director. However, now on the real plane or the paid EJets, we would press the toga button, which would automatically configure the autopilot for the takeoff mode. In the takeoff mode, it will automatically engage the auto throttle. It will automatically engage certain lateral and vertical autopilot modes after takeoff. It would also switch to the correct and specific autopilot modes at certain altitudes. It would capture LNAV and it would capture VNAV. And it does all of this automatically and it's really beautiful. None of these functions are available in the free EJets, so we'll have to do all of that manually. Now, here's one catch that's important for you to remember. The auto throttle has two different modes. One is called speed on thrust and the other one is called speed on elevator. Speed on thrust is used with any autopilot mode except for flight level change. And it works by moving the throttles to increase or decrease thrust in order to maintain speed. Speed on elevator is used whenever a flight level change is engaged and only then. In this mode, the throttles are not moving. Instead, they go to max thrust for climb or idle for descent, and it then maintains the speed by changing the climb rate using the elevator. And this is where the problem is. In the real plane or in the paid EJets, there would be a system called the thrust rating system that would protect the engines. So depending on the phase of the flight or the altitude, the FMS would limit the maximum thrust and it would constantly adjust it in order to stay in the safe range and prevent excessive power. However, the free EJets do not have that, and therefore, when you engage flight level change, the throttles will slam forward and the plane will climb way too fast, which is completely unrealistic. So unless you want to fly a Falcon 9 rocket, you need to manually manage the throttles or simply keep them at a lower setting to manage your climb rate. And the second catch is that on the paid EJets or in a real plane, the auto throttle would automatically switch from the speed on elevator to the speed on thrust mode when you reach the cruise altitude. However, on the free EJets, this only happens if you first press the auto throttle button before engaging the flight level change for the climb. I will show you this later on. Next, we will need to set the trim for takeoff. Here is where you can see the pitch trim setting. We can set it to about 2 degrees up. In the paid EJets or in the real EJets, the FMS would tell you what the correct pitch trim for the takeoff should be based on the weight and all the performance data that you entered. However, we do not have that in the free EJets, so I suggest that you just keep it at around 2 degrees up, which is a good average number for the takeoff trim. Okay, and now we need to change the autopilot source to FMS by clicking the FMS button, and we can see that the FMS is now the source of the autopilot and we're gonna follow the magenta route. At the same time, I'm gonna engage nav already. This would not be done on real plane. We would press toga, and which would then engage LNAV automatically at the right altitude. However, since we don't have that, we can turn it on already right now so that we don't have to deal with it later after the takeoff. Let's turn the landing lights on and the no smoking sign and fasten seatbelt sign. And the strobe light we can turn on as well. We're almost at the runway. And that's it. We are now configured for the takeoff and we can start taxiing into the position and hold. Now, before we take off, I would like to show you these speed management guidelines that we created to make it easier for you to know what speed to set for each phase of the flight. Now, in the paid EJets version 1.1.0, the FMS would take care of all of this. It would automatically set and change the speeds throughout the flight for you using the FMS speed. However, if you want to manage the speeds manually, we created these speed management guidelines that will make it easier for you. So you can take off with 180 or 210 knots. Today we'll do 210. After the takeoff, make sure to manage your speeds as you're retracting the flaps. Then remember to always stay at maximum 250 knots below 10,000 feet. As you cross 10,000 feet, you can increase the speed to 270 knots up to 290 knots. For cruise speed, you can increase it to 290 to 0.79 Mach. At top of descent, you can set the speed to 280 knots or 0.78 Mach. As you're approaching 10,000 feet again, you need to slow down to 250. And then we have the approach speeds, which we'll go over later in our flight. And please remember that these are just general guidelines, kind of like a rule of thumb. Every airline might use different speeds and every airport might use different speeds as well. But we created these just to make your life a little bit easier. Alright, and now you've learned everything you need to know to take off. So we can start increasing our throttles forward. Just make sure to don't push them all the way forward, just keep them at around the toga position. Alright, we can see the engines pulling up, we'll release the brakes. And now at around 140 knots, we are going to start rotating. Again, since we don't have any V-speeds calculated with the EFB or the FMS, we have to eyeball this. So at around 140 is good. And rotate. Positive rate, gear up. And I'm going to turn on the auto throttle, then flight level change. Next, the autopilot. And we can see that the throttle is firewalled all the way forward, so we need to bring them back in order to control that climb rate, which is currently completely unrealistic. Make sure to set it at around 75 to 80% N1. And make sure that the climb rate does not exceed 4,000 feet per minute. Climb rate can be seen right here. Alright, I'm going to add a bit more thrust now. Alright, we'll retract flaps, so flaps 1. And now, looking at the SID chart, I can see that the whole departure has to be flown at a maximum of 230 knots. So next I'm going to increase the flaps to flaps clean, and I'm going to set the speed to 230 knots. So this section of the flight plan is our departure, or the SID. And we have to stay at 230 knots up until here. Otherwise, the next limit is that we have to be at 250 knots below 10,000 feet. However, this is a pretty long SID, so it's possible that we will already be above 10,000 by the time we reach leg low. So we'll probably increase the speed for our climb speed. Again, keep in mind that my throttle setting is set at around 75% to maintain the 3,500 feet per minute climb rate. And remember, you only have to manage the throttles manually when the speed on elevator or flight level change mode is engaged. When the speed on thrust, which is the normal auto throttle mode, is engaged, it will control the throttles for you. Speed on elevator, it doesn't move the throttles, you set the throttles and it will adjust the elevator. Again, this only happens in the free E-jets. In the paid E-jets or the real E-jets, you don't have to worry about that because the FMS will automatically limit the thrust for you. And we can have a quick look at the after takeoff checklist. Landing gear up, flaps up, after takeoff checklist completed. All right. We can also turn off the landing lights as we have passed 10,000 feet. Now here's a preview of what the paid E-jets instruments would look like at the same part of the flight. You can also see the vertical situation profile there, and you can see the Authentic FMS on the left. And you can also see that the throttles are limited to 83% at this part of the climb. Now this is a pretty tight turn, so that is probably why we have the 230 knots limit in this SID. If we were going faster, the autopilot might have a hard time making the turn and it could overshoot it. So if you're experiencing some overshooting, make sure to manage your speeds. I'm gonna just fast forward a little bit to speed it up. Alright, and we have now passed Laglo and we are out of the SID, so we are flying towards Oscore. So we can now increase the speed to 280 knots. Now in our speed management guidelines, we said 270 for the climb. The AOM document says 290. After talking to some pilots, the climb speeds differ based on the aircraft, based on the airline. So if you aim anywhere between 270 and 290, you'll be good. We have already passed the 18,000 feet transition altitude, which is the transition altitude in the US, when you would press the standard button. However, our barometric setting is already set for the standard pressure, so we didn't need to do that. In Europe, you can do it as low as 3,000 feet. And as we are climbing, we have a bit of time, so I can show you a cool thing we have on our website, which is a dynamic comparison of the visuals or the 3D models and textures of our older E-jets, so the free E-jets, and our new E-jets family. And you can compare the cockpit as well as the exterior and also the cabin. Okay, and as we approach 30,000 feet, we're gonna press the middle of the speed knob and we're gonna change to Mach speeds. And we're gonna decrease the speed to 0.74 according to our speed management guidelines. Now 30,000 is just the ballpark. That is not always where you would change it. It's not always the changeover altitude. In the real E-jets or the paid E-jets, when you use the FMS speed, the plane would change for you. But in the free E-jets, you can use 30,000 as a rule of thumb. And we are about to reach the top of climb. So now, as soon as we reach the cruise altitude, have a look here, you'll see the speed on elevator mode change to speed on thrust. And at the same time, we'll see the flight level change mode change to the altitude hold mode. 3, 2, 1. Alright, there we go. So we see altitude hold right there, speed on thrust right there. Now this changed automatically because we engaged it right after takeoff before we pressed flight level change. If we didn't do that, this field would now be empty and the throttles would just stay at their last setting, which could lead to overspeeding, which could lead to oscillating. The plane would start flying up and down. So if you reach the cruise altitude and if you do not see the SPDT right there, simply press the auto throttle button. Okay, now we can increase our speed for the cruise speed, which is 0.79 Mach. And now I would like to show you how you can edit your flight plan. So first, we will start by adding a new waypoint. So if we look at our flight plan in the plan mode, we can step through it until we find the Victor Papa 011. There we go. And now I would like to add a new waypoint right after it, which is called Evaxi. So I'm gonna write Evaxi into the scratchpad. And then you add it right after the waypoint where you want to insert it. So I want to insert it after Victor Papa 011, so I'm going to click right there. Now that created a new discontinuity which we need to clear. If I stitch it, we can also see on the map the new waypoint. So to clear the discontinuity again, I'm going to select Aptan and stitch it back together. And now I can see in amber what the new route would look like if it was executed. So I'm happy with that, so I'm going to execute it. Perfect. So now we added a new waypoint. If I want to remove a waypoint, it is very simple. Simply press the delete button and press the button next to the waypoint that you want to delete. So I want to delete Victor Papa 011. Again, a new discontinuity. I'm going to stitch that back together, execute, and there we go. Victor Papa 011 is gone forever. And if you want to delete any other waypoint, you do it the exact same way. Next, I will show you how to do a direct to. So for example, if I want to fly directly to, let's have a look, Malag, which will be here. So let's have a quick look where we are, right here. If I want to fly directly to Malag, or actually, let's fly to Evaxi. Let's change it that way so you can see how the route's gonna change. So I'm gonna hit direct. I'm gonna select Evaxi, and I will simply execute that. Gonna zoom in. Let's see. Okay, and now we can see that the plane is flying directly to Evaxi. We can step through the whole flight plan, come back to the beginning of it, and there we are. And the next waypoint is Evaxi. So now I would like to talk about something that many people have asked us about before, and that is the lights on the glare shield panel. If you used our older E-jets, you might have noticed that the lights above the buttons were illuminated. However, that was wrong. Even though the lights are physically there on the real E-jets, Embraer has purposefully disabled them because they want the pilot to keep looking at the PFD to verify which autopilot modes are currently on. If the lights were on the glare shield panel, the pilot would have to look away, which could be less safe. Therefore, in this version of the free E-jets or in our paid E-jets, these lights will always be off. So if we have a look at the FMA, which is the flight mode annunciator section, this section shows the vertical modes. These boxes represent the lateral modes. For example, I could switch to heading right now. If I sing the heading, then I just switch to heading. Now we are following the heading. I'm gonna go back to LNAV by pressing the nav button. This section shows that the autopilot is on and that the auto throttle is on. And this annunciator tells me which auto throttle mode is currently engaged. So we have speed on thrust or speed on elevator, which I explained before. So that is the FMA. Next, I would like to point out that the flight director on the free E-jets is not correct either. You can see that we have the double Q flight director with a cross. That is not how it would look on the real Embraer or on the paid E-jets. The double Q flight director is only available for the takeoff or go-round modes. For all other phases of the flight, you would have the single Q flight director with the flight path vector aircraft symbol, which actually shows you where the plane is flying right now. Alright, and now we're going to continue our cruise. And as we have a bit of time, this will be a good time to review our descent speed. So let's bring up our speed management guidelines and let's have a look. So at the top of descent, we will change our speed to 280 or 0.79 Mach as we'll start our descent. Then we'll slow down to 250 before 10,000 feet so that we cross 10,000 feet at 250. At 20 miles out of the airport, roughly, we will set our speeds to 210 knots. At 13 miles out, we will set our speeds to 180 and we will set flaps 1. 10 miles out, we'll set flaps 2, speed to 160. 8 miles out, we will select gear down, flaps 3, and set speed to 150. 5 miles out, we will set our landing flaps, so flaps 5 or flaps full, and we will set the speed to VAP, which will be normally calculated using the EFB. However, we do not have that, so I'm again gonna use some arbitrary ballpark numbers for the speeds. And yeah, so in the free jets we do not have VNAV, which is an incredibly useful and intricate autopilot mode, which controls the vertical profile of the aircraft throughout the flight from the moment you take off all the way until you're landing. It will pretty much mean that you do not ever have to touch any of the vertical profile modes. It does everything for you. It climbs at the right speed to the right altitude. At top of descent, it will automatically begin the descent, so you don't actually have to press any buttons. All you have to do is lower the altitude before top of descent, and it will then automatically manage the descent to be exactly on the right descent path. And it will also respect any altitude restrictions in the departure or arrival procedures. So if there is a waypoint that has to be crossed below or above a certain altitude, the VNAV will calculate that in advance and it will do that for you. So again, the lack of VNAV in the free jets means that we have to do all of that manually, which makes it tedious and more complicated. In the ERJ family, it is just much easier, more enjoyable, and it is exactly how the real pilots would fly the plane. And that is exactly why they love it, because it is a very simple aircraft to operate. So on the FMS, you can click on the progress button, which will show you where the next waypoints are. And here we can see our distance to the top of descent, which is the point at which we need to start our descent down. You can also see it on a map as the T/D symbol. So before we reach the top of descent, there's one thing you need to do. You need to lower the altitude, because at the top of descent, we will engage the FPA autopilot mode and we will start our descent. So in order to engage any vertical profile autopilot mode, we first need to change the altitude. So I'm gonna change the altitude down to 3,000 feet or 4,000 feet. Okay. And now when we'll be around 4 nautical miles away from the top of descent, there we are. Right now we can see the scale, which will represent our position relative to the descent path. So the magenta pointer will show where the descent path is, and the center of the scale is us, pretty much. Okay, we're about 1 nautical mile away from top of descent. Now in the real E-jets, now the planes would start descending completely automatically, the same in the paid E-jets. However, we have to do it manually here, so I'm gonna hit FPA, which is the flight path angle mode, and I'm gonna use the knob to adjust the angle at which I want to be descending. So we can see that the descent path is below us, so we need to catch up with it. So I'm gonna increase the descent angle, and we can also change the speed from 0.79 to 0.78. At 30,000 feet, I'm gonna change back to knots by clicking in the middle of the speed knob, and I'm gonna set the speed to 280 knots. And we can see that we are approaching the descent path. Right now we are right at the descent path, so I'm gonna increase the descent path to minus 2.5 degrees. And I'm gonna keep it there at minus 2.5 because I know that that's the value that the FMS used to calculate the top of descent and the descent path. Okay, so we are now in the star, so the arrival procedure for Vienna. And all we need to do is just make sure to adjust and change the flight path angle to keep up with the descent path. Now, as I mentioned before, in our paid E-jets or the real E-jets, VNav would take care of this automatically for you. You wouldn't have to do anything at all, you would just sit back and relax, because VNav would automatically track the descent path and stay right on it. Now, if you're just starting out in X-Plane, or even if you've been around for a long time, there's a lot of stuff that you need to learn about X-Plane to really enjoy it. But the problem is that all the right information is scattered all around the internet, different forums, or even just passed on from one user to another. And last summer, when I was staying at my grandma's and I couldn't work on X-Plane, I decided to do something about it, so I wrote a free ebook called X-Plane Explained. Whether you're a beginner or an expert looking for advanced tips or tricks, this book covers everything from getting started with X-Plane, navigating the forums, finding and installing add-ons, tutorials, troubleshooting guides, performance optimization guides, insider tips, and so much more. I just took the 10 years of knowledge I have as an X-Plane developer and I put them all in this free ebook. So you can go and download it on our website. Now, another thing that you might have noticed is that the sound on the free E-jets are really not great. They sound a little bit like a Formula One. On the paid E-jets, we have much better sounds implemented throughout the plane. They were optimized for X-Plane 12. They were approved by real pilots. We worked with them. They gave us some really good feedback. For example, above 250 knots, you're not meant to hear any of the engines in the cockpit. All you hear is the noise of the wind. And so yeah, sounds play a very big part of the immersion when you're flying in a sim. By the way, if your cockpit in X-Plane 12 is really dark, there is a really great plugin that offers a simple solution for that. I'm using it right now, and it is called the RXP X-Plane 12 Enhancer, and you can find more info about where to download it on our website. I absolutely recommend it. It makes a huge difference. Alright, and as we're slowly approaching 10,000 feet, we will need to start decelerating. So we want to hit 10,000 feet at 250 knots. So I'm gonna decrease the speed to 250 to make sure that the plane has enough time to slow down. If you can see that the plane is not slowing down enough, you can always open the speed brakes, which will help it slow down. And I'm gonna adjust the flight path angle again to catch up with the descent path. Alright, I'm gonna retract the speed brakes. Now I can see that the vertical deviation pointer is doing slightly weird things on this approach. Again, this is calculated by the default FMS in X-Plane. There is nothing I can do about that. I have a feeling that it will jump again right after we cross that waypoint. So yeah, this is just the default system in X-Plane. In our paid E-jets, we have our own VNAV that will calculate the vertical path much more accurately, and it will follow it perfectly. Yeah, and we can see it just jumped right down. So yeah, I'm gonna adjust the flight path angle again to get a bit closer to it. We're almost at 10,000 feet now, and we're flying at 250, which is correct. Now I will want to go to the progress page to see how far I am from the destination. So right now we are 43 miles out, and when we reach 30 miles out on a real plane, a couple of things would happen. First of all, the FMS would prompt you to change to approach speeds, and the ILS Autotune feature would automatically pre-select the correct frequency into the radio for your selected approach. We are currently working on this for our paid E-jets, and it will also be part of the version 1.1.0. So if you are watching this in the future and that version has already been released, then our paid E-jets already have that capability. So on our free E-jets, we're gonna have to hit M, open the map, and select the frequency manually. So we're gonna go to the IFR low en route mode, zoom out. I'm going to select the approach I want to fly, and then I can click tune nav1 or nav2, which is going to enter the frequency into the radio. We can now see that the approach has been identified. If I hit the radio page on the FMS, I will also be able to see the frequency right there. This is also where I could change the frequency, and I could also change it on this radio panel on the pedestal, which would not be there on a real plane or in our paid E-jets, but the free E-jets offer this simple radio panel. And now that we have the frequency loaded, we can also engage the preview mode, which is right here. So the preview mode will show you the deviation needles for the approach while you're still in LNAV. I can switch between lock 1 or lock 2 or turn it off. So right now it is pretty much showing us that the approach is right behind us. That's because we are still flying away from it. As soon as we turn around, we're gonna see the preview needles turn, and it will show us how we're aligning with the approach. I'm gonna adjust the descent rate again. All right, we're starting the turn. And now, as we're getting closer to our approach, we can already go ahead and arm the approach by pressing the approach button, which would arm the glide slope and the localizer. And they're gonna stay armed until we change the autopilot source from FMS to the localizer, which we'll do with the V/L or VOR/localizer button. Now we can see that the blue line of the preview is showing us that we are starting to align with the approach. However, remember, we're still in magenta, we're still flying LNAV. Now, the real E-jets and version 1.1.0 of our paid E-jets would automatically switch between LNAV and the FMS as the source for the autopilot to the localizer. However, we do not have that capability on the free E-jets, so you're gonna have to switch the autopilot sources manually, and this is a crucial step in the ILS approach procedure. Although I can see that I am above the descent path, I'm not worrying about that too much because I can see that the glide slope is above us. So we are below the glide slope, and I can see that the glide slope indication is slowly coming down, meaning we are slowly getting closer to it, so we can even level off right now and just wait until we intercept the glide slope. Now, at any point now that we see that we are aligned with the lateral deviation of the localizer, we can now press the V/L button and switch to the localizer. We can see the localizer is now engaged and captured, and we will see that as soon as the glide slope gets closer to the center, it will change from FPA to glide slope. We are now also 17 miles out, so I'm gonna decrease the speed to 210. I'm gonna open the speed brakes again to slow even quicker. And we just saw that the glide slope just engaged and captured. And this is how you'd fly an ILS approach. So you need to make sure that you have armed the approach by pressing the approach button, and that you switch from LNAV to the NAV1 or NAV2 frequency pressing the V/L button. And it is always a good practice to try to capture the glide slope from below. Okay, we're at 210, so I'm gonna decrease the speed and I'm gonna retract the speed brakes, and I'm gonna set flaps 1 and speed to 180. And by the way, you can always find the speed management guidelines on the demo flight page on our website. The chime you just heard is telling us that we're 1000 away from our altitude. However, we're in a glide slope, we're just gonna fly right through it. However, we can set the altitude to the missed approach altitude in case we need it. So we can already see the runway right in front of us. We are 10 miles out, so I'm gonna decrease the speed to 160 and flaps 2. Flaps 2 is changing. We can also set the auto brake to medium. And you can see that the flight director is following the glide slope. I'm going to change to 150 and I'll do flaps 3 and gear down. We can turn the landing lights on. And you can even hear the cabin announcements. Alright, 5 nautical miles. I'm gonna go to 140. Now on the paid E-jets, you wouldn't have to guess what the speeds would be. You'd be able to calculate them on the EFB, and the FMS would automatically set them for you. And the EFB would even calculate how much runway length you need for your landing based on your landing weight. So as we don't have any V-speeds on a PFD, we're gonna have to do some guesswork. So, and from my past experience, I'll set it to 140 now and then 135 for the actual touchdown. I'm gonna set the minimums to 200 feet. And this indication is the radio altitude, showing us how many feet above the ground we are right now. The minimums and the radio altitude indications are not correct. They look differently on the real E-jets. Now what we're gonna do is we're gonna fly to 200 feet above the ground, then we're gonna disconnect the autopilot and the auto throttle. On the paid E-jets, it would disconnect automatically for you. As soon as it would go into the retard mode, it would disconnect the auto throttle. However, we do not have that on the free E-jets, so we're gonna have to disconnect it manually. Might as well just do it right now. So I disable the auto throttle and I have manual control of the auto throttle, and I'm gonna retard the throttles as soon as I cross the runway threshold. I should have set the speed to 135, so I'm going to start already decreasing the speed by pulling the throttles back. Minimums, disconnecting the autopilot. And I'm gonna start pulling the throttles all the way back to idle, and a nice flare. Reverse. Ground spoilers are deployed. And that is it. Welcome to Vienna. We can retract the speed brakes, retract the flaps, and get out of the runway as soon as possible. And that's it. I hope you have completed this flight successfully. I think that these free E-jets are still going to give you a lot of fun. And if you're interested in really experiencing what it's like to fly a truly authentic E-jet with a smooth experience without having to do a lot of manual work, seeing what the E-jets really look like with a fine-tuned flight model, you should definitely explore our E-jets family. You can also download our free preview model, which you can then load and explain, and you'll be able to explore the model, you'll be able to move around it, which is much better than just looking at screenshots, and you'll also be able to check the performance on your computer to make sure that you will not have some really bad frame rates. So one more time, I'm so excited to be celebrating 10 years of X-Crafts, and I want to thank you for being part of it. See you next time!